So the focus of this webinar is to just talk about digital transformation with ACDC. We will look at a couple of customer experiences, pull out some best practices. So I'm Colin Hobson, and I can turn on my camera just for a short minute here to introduce myself. All right, so anyway, there we go. So hello everybody. And with me is Johan Nell, and then on video we've recorded the questions relating to customer experiences and etc. with Zane Tronson from City of Greater Bendigo. So thank you. All right, so anyway, I'll get going and we'll zip right through this. So I'll get Zane to introduce himself as well as to his role.
I work for the City of Greater Bendigo, which is located in central Victoria in southeastern Australia. And we are a regional council of about 3,000 square kilometres. We're kind of the third largest regional city council. And we're on the Dja Dja Wurrung land and Tangerang country for First Nations. And our population's around about kind of 120,000, something like that, and growing. We certainly are growing as a city, mixture of city and regional properties. And in terms of development, we process around about 100 subdivisions per year and about 50 capital works projects, large capital works projects that require as constructed data to be delivered. Obviously, the city delivers a number more capital works projects. And so I work within the GIS and Assets department, which is kind of under the umbrella of engineering. And we are responsible for maintaining the asset management system, all spatial data, the corporate GIS. We're responsible for asset revaluations, mobile computing, spatial solution, all spatial analysis for the organisation, and maps. So a lot of responsibilities, focusing today obviously on the asset perspective and as constructed data.
For those who don't know about Open Spatial, we do have offices in 3 different continents, major focus in Australia, and then in the US we've also been active since 2014 and have customers there all over. So there's a mix of customers all over. The US is on the right, more or less. So you'll see it's a good mix of water authorities. We do have water authorities in the US as well, but also other customers, anything from fiber to college campuses to national park, parcels for major areas and telecom, etc. So the focus of this is just looking at the agenda. We got what is digital transformation. We'll look at the role ACDC is playing in that. I don't think we really realized that that's what we were doing all these years. And then looking specifically at middle workflows of your ASCONs, sort of a before and after from the digital transformation perspective. And then if we keep going, we'll look at some of the benefits as per, we'll ask Zane that question and look at some others. And we'll just show one slide on digital twins and digital transformation. You may be interested in that. And then I think that's pretty much a little focus then on issues and best practices. And there is also an evaluation of kind of cost, return on investment and stuff like that at the end. So I'm going to move along. And so what is digital transformation? Well, here you go. Take a look at this one. I'll give you a minute. So context of digital transformation. Gartner give us a really long one. Digital transformation can refer to anything from IT modernization, for example, cloud computing, to digital optimization, to the invention of new digital business models, terms widely used in public sector organizations to refer to modest initiatives such as putting services online or legacy modernization. I actually prefer the Wikipedia one, where it kind of captures that generic general thing where digital transformation is the adoption of digital technology by an organization to digitize non-digital products, services, or operations. And these definitions pretty much sum it up, and that is, it is what it means to you. Yes, it involves digital, and yes, it's the transfer of information between processes, etc. And so what we're looking at is, with ACDC, we're looking fairly closely at essentially assets, mostly utilities for the open spatial focus, but we do a lot of other things. And that really is the focus on that transition between the handover of your ASCONs and capturing that data. And that's the transformation that ACDC is there. So we're just turning on a quick poll for the folks online. There's quite a lot of you, which is great. To what extent has your organization applied digital transformation to its new as constructed submittals? So I'm focusing down on those as constructed submittals. If you want to go ahead and respond to that. So this is interesting. I think we're in the earlier stages of digital transformation, and so here's the results of that. So in terms of ACDC itself, for those who've not seen ACDC before, it's a comprehensive solution, and it's really focused on automating the workflow, creation, validation, and loading or conversion of as constructed data, usually CAD. We can do GIS data too, but loading that straight into your GIS and CMMS system. So it really is focused on that handover from the construction side of it to the consumption of the data. And I'll show you why that's important and what we do there. So we will spend a little time looking at what ACDC does.
Before deploying ACDC, it was a process of manual digitizing assets off plans, PDFs, and then importing those into our asset management system. And post implementation of ACDC, the data remains digital and it is reviewed using ACDC desktop and imported into the asset management system.
Okay. So just talking a little bit about, how it's changed their workflow. So we're focused on this spot right there of the handover, and that is one of the digital transformations. We noticed actually a few different ones. If you zoom in on that, the traditional workflow was essentially construction on the left, which included design and checking. And then, to the left of that was construction, then the actual construction, which included then inspections, etc., and then data capture, which is the GIS side of the house and putting that into the system. If we look at it as a linear, there's usually a whole CAD section. There's a conversion, maybe even using ETL, and then GIS and 3D. And what ACDC is doing is it deals with that whole convert thing as well as the CAD tool. So the whole philosophy on this is to do this digital transformation, we want to start right at the beginning, the creation of the data, so that whether it's CAD or survey, we're getting that in a form that is consumable and validatable, if that's a word, for the GIS side of the house. And so that's just a fundamental that you want to get as much information at construction time where they have survey accuracy, where they know what the equipment is, where they know what that asset type is, where they know all of the parameters about the asset, and we know what the date and project is. It just makes sense to push that straight into the system. And if I put that in pictures, what we've got then is a build out here of going from CAD drawing and running through a whole set of steps, typically where you're going to get a CAD drawing and then the actual portal, as well as the ability to do notifications and then GIS data. And if you're in the Australian context, we can push it straight into the national map or Vic map or any of the other digital twin sort of available platforms that there are there. And so ACDC is going from the one to the other, and we've transformed this from analog PDFs kind of thing directly into digital. What format of ASCON data is submitted in the organization that you're familiar with? And you can choose one or more out of that list. So if you just fill out that, we can take a look and just see in this particular audience what it is that you've got there. Let's take a look at the results. So the results of the first poll, a lot of PDF, a lot of CAD. And the third most then would be some sort of shape movement kind of GIS data and still some paper, which is interesting because digital transformation, even within CAD and even within the GIS data, even though it's digital, you still might not get the full workflow. Let's do one last poll. How do you validate submitted data? So this is asking, there's no validation, or the engineers check manually before sign off, or there's field checking and what should say survey, or you do automated checking in the cloud. So if we look at that, we're still on the early stages of having this as a regular digital transformation. So I think we're really essentially this particular audience, it varies. And I've done this survey a few times in different contexts, but the results are not that different here than what we come up before. And that is that there's a lot of work going on and manual work that could be automated, for example, into a digital workflow. Okay, let's keep going then. So what are we talking about in this transformation? If we look at it, there's three tiers here. There's the sort of documents and standards that and include, say, your GIS data set. There's also what the asset owner does in terms of their assets and dealing with that information. And then there's the creation of data, which can either be survey GIS or drawn as CAD. And if we look at those, these are essentially just data sources or controls, and the transformation is moving between these. And so this is all part of setup. How do we do that? So in documents, there's various things there, including your GIS database. On the asset owner, to do a digital transformation, you kind of sort of have to know what you want. And one of those is you could start with a data standard, or you could look at what you currently store. And that's an interesting thing, as I've talked about this in many places. Some folks will say they don't have a standard, and I'll actually say, well, if you have a GIS, you already in fact do have a standard. You have at least a baseline of what you're storing and recording. If you take then that information, you can go and build out what you then produce for the creator of what we've got as the drafter lane here, where it's a toolkit. You've got either those tools and you've got essentially a documentation set or a digital set of tools that say this is what we expect and this is how we're going to check them automatically. And so without getting into all of the nitty-gritty of ACDC, there's a workflow here that you can turn very much by kind of when you're doing setup, you start at the bottom and then you work your way through it and define what it is you want, what you need, and you go from there. So data standards is a way to go, and you definitely do need a documented standard, but you probably also need a digital version of that documented standard that allows you to build that out. In terms of data standards, there's a lot. ACDC actually supports all of these and includes for ASPEC specifically, we're really probably the premier ASPEC application, which got all the disciplines, complete off-the-shelf toolkit, and have already had over 10,000 submissions validated against that standard that we know of online, actually. We don't, when people do it on the desktop, we have no idea how many they're doing. And so ACDC has been around for just over 10 years now, and the portal for 5 years, so pretty mature kind of product. And so I'll use that as the context for this digital transformation discussion. So for ASPEC, for example, we're the only solution that has all the standards. We are using that, and so it's all of these kind of menus off the shelf. That's a toolkit you'd get from OpenSpatial that'll do, OSPEC, RSPEC, DSPEC, WSPEC, etc. And then in this, we can go in and build that out. We also, in those tools, then produce those menus that you see here.
This is in BricsCAD.
Yeah, so this is showing it in BricsCAD. And on here, this is Attributor, which allows us to do domain values. So one of the things that ACDC does to help this digital transformation is actually this Attributor thing produces a config file that you can give to and let be used disconnected on the desktop of the data creator, and allows then essentially it's an embodiment of whatever your standard is. So once again, ACDC does custom standards. So if you've customized anything, you can push this out there and get it to the people who have it in their hands. So it's a downloadable app, and we got it for BricsCAD and AutoCAD in the app stores. It's free, but it allows you to get your definitions into the hands of the creator. So then if we look at the creation and validation of this transformation, that's sort of step one, is enabling people to use the digital tools to create stuff. And that ties in with our philosophy. So if we look then at the top tier, so now we've sort of changed hats from our GIS perspective, where we start at the bottom corner of the slide to this top corner. So if you're the drafting or CAD or surveyor, you're going to start there and do drawing creation. So to this, with ACDC solution, you're going to log into the portal, you're going to download the toolkit, and then you can go and draw stuff and submit it when done in the portal. That's a standalone. You don't need anything to do that except for that login. It either passes or fails, and at that point, you can then go in, and if you're portal only, you will then get output a drawing file and or a GIS data, which you can import straight into your GIS database. If you're the asset owner, like Zane was talking about, they can do in-house validation. So ACDC, in this digital transformation, we've got the solution that's both online and in-house, and you can run the same thing, same workflow in both. The portal actually adds a few new dimensions because it actually produces a single source of truth in the cloud where all that collection of submittals is. So what we're doing then on the in-house is in essence taking that data from the portal or in-house and pushing it straight into your GIS database. So once again, we're going from that creation of digital assets and putting it directly and validated into your solution. And I think we can build this one out. So yeah, this is the desktop. So these three things, these three bubbles are the components of the ACDC solution. The desktop itself we use in two ways. It is a workhorse where you can go in, get a CAD drawing, validate it again in the desktop and push it and convert it straight into your GIS, whether that's Esri or whether that's Munsis or any GIS database, doesn't matter. That the desktop is that. The desktop's also a configuration tool. So in the desktop, you have a whole configurator and it'll look to the GIS and to the CAD drawing and allow you to build up that thing we call a toolkit. In other words, those layers, those blocks, those attributed blocks, even the menus, you can build those in the tools on the desktop, which allows you to customize and build out in-house, which is very, very powerful. But there's also a full-blown off-the-shelf toolkit, specifically if you have a common data standard, like in Australia, ASPEC would be an example. We've got some ADAC customers as well. In the US, we've actually produced a national CAD standards-based standard that takes essentially the Munsis data model, or what we call the universal data model, because it's used in multiple geographies. And we have that as an off-the-shelf. So just to give you an idea. So what about digital transformations? We made a little list to say, well, where are we transforming things? So there's the attributing and standardizing of CAD data with attributes. Bullet number one here is where draft people, they'll put either text or leader lines or attributed blocks or any kind of attribute on a drawing, and by doing it in a standardized way, that allows for digital transformation, because if you have the drawing coming in with the same naming, the same definitions all the time, it makes a big difference. We're also doing this transformation where validation is no longer a manual checking, it's a fully automated validation. That includes attributes, it includes spatial characteristics. Well, let's go with topological, in other words, nodes and links and lines and connectivity between them. And then you can look at even relationships in those. So if you're doing a gravity network, yes, we can look at upstream and downstream invert elevations and check that that all works. We can also do spatial things like simple stuff, things like if you have a roadway, the name of the roadway needs to be within that particular roadway polygon. So that's a text feature inside of a polygon feature, or you can do other things like you can't have an electric transformer within 2 meters of a water connection. So there's two different features, spatial relationship, anything like that, or inside of easements or outside of zones, anything like that we can look at. And digital transformation, the notification and communication between parties. So we're transforming. And we didn't really actually realize this so much when we did the portal, except we then added a whole notification framework as folks started using it. But when we started out, we weren't really aware that we would transform effectively how you notify. So you can set up a project, add a developer, and add a user or an organization, and it will automatically notify them. They then get the toolkit. They can do a complete digital sort of self-serve straight between the system and then submit to that project. So it becomes a transformation of the workflow itself. The actual conversion and capture into GIS, this is essentially an ETL, but it's fully digital within the ACDC solution. So that's really from, conception to end of all of that. And that takes us to a comprehensive combination of both workflows and full digital creation, validation, and conversion of as constructed plans. The other thing is there's another little curved ball that we've realized, and that is ACDC, we've actually designed it so that it can be used by two different audiences, the developer view and the asset owner view. So asset owners, you define a project, you do work. Developers do work for multiple asset owners. And here's actually just a snapshot of those interactions. So on the left, you'll see some examples of asset owners, and on the right are the developers or engineering construction firms that are doing that work. And you'll see they service a whole cross connect through that. And so within ACDC, we've designed it so it works within those two different workflows. So the digital transformation for the folks on the left is a little different than for the folks on the right, and we're trying to cover that. A very interesting little chart about servicing multiple and then an asset owner getting work done by a bunch of different groups as well. So let's go back to the ACDC thing. So this is nuts and bolts within a drawing. We're looking at all of the attributes. You can see on the left, those will be ASPEC-like attributes. Those are put onto blocks, and then we can check those. Here's the portal. Inside of the portal, somebody will have a desktop. You'll see they've submitted, in this case on the little bar chart along, 35 submissions that have failed, 15 that have passed. That's kind of normal, a 1 to 3 ratio. Once you got used to it, about the third time it goes. The other thing that's remarkable is look at the timing. One of the questions I'd love to ask, but I don't know in this particular thing, what's the before and after? Actually, I got 2 case studies. We'll look at some slides on them. How long did it take before you put in something like ACDC, and how long does it take now that you have ACDC? And we'll actually I'll give you some results on that we've done some surveys on that. So here's the dashboard for somebody on the portal. They can click on a drawing and you'll see you can cover hundreds of entities failing and passing. We're dealing with warnings. We're dealing with attribute errors, break errors, etc. And once it's gone through the portal, the actual developer would go in and say that if it's passed, they get that certified check, and then they can actually go in and flag it as ready for review. You can, of course, download that. Here's the output data. What we do is 2 kinds of output: drawing with object data. So it's a validated drawing, and we've done things like snap lines and break lines where valves on, snap them into 2 pieces and carry the attributes. Here you can see ASPEC output with all of the different groups into shapefiles. And so this is a validated set of shapefiles, and I'll show you this in a picture in a minute. Before we do that, let's take a look. One of the things with ACDC is all of this error checking. So if your drawing does not pass, then you're going to get a failed drawing, which you can download, and it will have circles in it with markers. And that little comment down at the bottom there shows what's wrong. And so this is saying, look, that's an RSpec roadway area and it needs to be a closed polygon. So we're checking that one. You can even get a list. The list sounds great, but when you look at it, I'd rather have the picture, but it does give you essentially the same. You've got a unique identifier. And then on this one, this is a failed drawing, and it just shows a couple of different things. Let's look at that one. You'll see down the bottom left, invalid code and string too long. So we're checking code values isolated. So this is a spatial check where you can't have a node that's not touching, say, a pipe. So that's a rule. So all of those rules can be worked on. Here's another one where this area's got to be closed. So it just picks up a lot of different errors and does those fully automated. Once again, you can have 1 or 2 checks, or you can have 100 different checks, and we'll go in and load that. So within ACDC, we're actually checking that stuff and then moving forward. So that set of ASPEC files we were looking at with RSpec, DSpec, say you get the drawing to validate, just to show you it's real GIS data, we'll click on a few of these. There's all of the attributes. So what you're seeing here is all of the ASPEC on the right-hand side, all the ASPEC properties. And this really is the value right here. You can see that what you're getting out of this digital transformation is quality check data that is comprehensive and filled out. You're getting a lot of information. And so I'm skipping over some of the ACDC specific things like the construction date, and we can do batch loading of, you can put one block that's like normally what we call the common block, but it's a block that contains typically the project and the date and that sort of thing, metadata, if you will, and we can apply that across the board to all of the different assets. So we just pointed out a point, line, and area feature there. So ACDC essentially is in the middle, and we're producing structured, self-validated, and streamlined input. We're doing that in a managed, consistent way, and it's available on the cloud 24/7. And what you're getting is accurate, attributed, and efficient GIS data as the output. That's sort of the overall transformation from, if you were doing it manually or PDFs or even getting CAD drawings, those things, everybody has their own way of doing it. To consume those and validate them is a challenge. So here's sort of a pathway. And what we've done specifically in ACDC is try and keep the before and after. We've tried to keep it the same. This looks like this sort of one of the early slides where there's still somebody draws something. It's just now they're doing it with a template, and they're doing it with specific rules, and they're doing it with drop downs for domain values, but they're still drawing something. And then there's a validation process. Was manual, now it's fully automated. But there still needs to be a plan check. There's still a manual sign off on those before acceptance. It's just that now the person doing the manual sign off knows that every depth, diameter, material, etc. has already been checked and is on all of those assets. Whereas before, they would have to sort of go and check line weights and layers or whatever it is. And so it was a very time-consuming procedure. So now you've got much better quality data and much more confidence in it. And so that's one of the differences. Of course, the time taken. And also now what happens is those, because you still need someone to check the plans, but those folks can now use what I call, they can do the value added, the real value things where they know, oh, in this instance, there's some sort of easement or there's some other requirement or there's a capacity. That's the stuff that still needs to do it in plan check. There's still a plan check approval and process. But what you get at the end of the day is you've got fully captured data. So let's go and see what Zane had to say with their before and after in detail.
Yes. So our workflow before implementing the ACDC solution was quite significantly different than post implementation of ACDC. Prior to implementing ACDC, we received as constructed data in many different forms. So we would receive data in a PDF, emailed to us in AutoCAD drawings, or sometimes just scribbled on pieces of paper. So various forms we're receiving as constructed data. There would be a position such as myself in the GIS and assets team that would take those various inputs and essentially geo-reference them into a GIS package, desktop package, and digitize. So undertake the manual digitization from those various inputs, digitize those onto GIS map using aerial photography and parcel boundaries, or potentially the digital inputs such as the PDF plans, and then go through the painstaking task of manually attributing all of those assets that were manually digitized, and then obviously process them, import them into the asset management system. So quite a tedious process, a process of duplication in work, and very inefficient, to be honest.
Yeah, so that doesn't sound very different than the poll we just took in terms of the process in large part for the majority. So let's go then to the next slide, which is after deploying ACDC and how did that impact the workflow?
So post implementation of the ACDC solution, we set up a project in the ACDC portal to receive an as constructed submission. We monitor the portal for submissions and we get an automated notification when we've received a validated submission. We then download that beautiful DWG file that is fully drawn, survey accurate, fully attributed is the big key there too. We have a look at it, make sure it looks acceptable and agrees with any other as constructed plans we may have received. We then either accept that drawing or reject it and ask for revisions. And once accepted, we then process all that asset data into the ACDC staging database using ACDC desktop in AutoCAD. And then we import that into our asset management system. So a significant change in process post implementation of ACDC, going from manual digitizing into an automated digital workflow.
So here's a case study, and this one's actually was presented at Locate in 2015. So this was really before the portal was going in its full glory that it is now. But South Australia Water did a pilot, and they very, very meticulously took the same data set, did it manually, did it with ACDC. And this is not the whole process. This is just once you've got the actual file, capturing the data, what do you get? Okay, so sometimes with the digital validation that you can do where people can upload to the portal 24/7 and they can get something validated, that speeds things up a lot. But if you look at this, we've got a 90 minutes, which is pretty quick, really. It must have been not too large of a project. 90 minutes to take the CAD drawing and go in and rejig that thing and put it and create it as CAD data. Pulling that down into ACDC, it was 8 minutes. So that was a 5-fold. And then for wastewater, did the same project. In this case, there's actually a lot more with the inverts and depths, etc. And they get a 10-fold improvement there. And that's just, basically adjusting things, lining them up, etc. So it's not just the time, it's also quality. So what they did is actually compared, well, what's the length difference, manual versus electronic, and then relating that back to the land parcels and checking that and compared to it. And then if you could even see the differences, it was significant. The digital one was closer to survey, it was more accurate, and it was taken from there. So what they've got is also in terms of connectivity, for the water data, they had great connectivity, valves being at the end of mains, hydrant snapping to mains, fittings or junctions being at endpoints, etc. And just basically saying that the ACDC validation of the ASCON drawing file successfully checked the SA water elements. And this was in 2015. Some of those attribute errors, we in fact learned from that, and we've added a bunch more and built out, in fact, a very sophisticated set of checking for just about everything, including multi-polygons and related items so that you can look at one feature in relation to another. And so really all the mandatory attributes were transferred successfully into the GIS. Here's a survey that we've done recently among existing ACDC customers. We basically asked how long does it take before and after? And so the before would be the start of the arrow, and the after would be arrow where the point of the arrow is. And so looking at time, 30 days to 1 day, that would be one of the customers. Typically at least 3 or 4 days. You heard what Zane said, a full-time equivalent is now reduced to essentially 2 to 3 hours a week. That's the gains that they've had, so that you can add them onto this. And what we've done here is this is sort of a matrix for how long and what's the confidence. So also the confidence has gone up. So we can put that on a chart that's kind of like this. If you look at the matrix, if you take a long time and a low quality, you're sort of at the bottom where you're not there. But if you take a long time, you do expect to get better quality data. It's just not that efficient. And so what we want is to go from the bottom left to the top right. And that's where ACDC puts you there, because it's not, you know exactly what quality you're getting. You can see the speeds, you can check the thing, and so it goes. There's also the actual costs could be in this dynamic. So let's just go and we'll take that survey. And if we take the average of all of these and we put in those quadrants, you can see if we take that to this, essentially that's the start is green and the end is blue. But out of those surveyed, we've got an average estimated 264 person days saved per year per organization. So that's basically 1 FTE you're going to save. In terms of returns on investment, that's actually astounding from where we're going. And we'll continue to do these kinds of surveys. They are anonymous, but we're tracking them. And that's kind of why I take the polls, just to see that the audience we have are in a similar position to where this is. Just one slide on digital twins. Because it's digital, we can do a bunch of things. So this is the national map. We got Melbourne down in the middle. With ACDC, we've got a full-blown CAD drawing. You can take that thing, validate it with all its attributes, and you can just pop it straight in here and load it as the output. And then obviously you can do what the national map offers as functionality, but you can move backwards and forwards. But here's the value. This is not just a CAD drawing. This is validated stuff that's full blown. You push the button into your GIS and you get all of the attributes. That's really where it meets the road. So yeah, we've changed the process. We've made it digital, but it's full blown detailed data. And so the viewing the national map's got this neat slider where you can go backwards and forwards, sort of a before and after thing. That's there. Even though it's 3D, they've got a flattened map in there. But just to show you that that's sort of an additional piece. And it does have an impact in that people can actually see where that's going to be before it's maybe even built, if you took the as designed and you ran it through this process. Well, let's finish up with common issues, best practices. Well, here's one. So this is more of a digital challenge than a digital transformation, but anyway, we asked Zane what his advice would be to anybody thinking about it. So let's go ahead and listen to this.
So when it comes to advice for another organisation considering the ACDC solution and also our learnings, firstly, I would consider about planning of the project and to ensure that it's going to be adequately resourced to implement the project properly. It's a considerable digital transformation project. It's a change of process. It's not just a software installation. So don't underestimate the investment required to effectively implement the ACDC solution and have it fully integrated. Also consider the cost of this initial implementation in terms of resourcing hours and the ongoing licensing fees. Also, another piece of advice that I'd give is to start small and start simple. Master the process, the change of process for perhaps a couple of different asset classes, rather than trying to receive every piece of as constructed information across every asset class via ACDC to begin with. I would start with your major asset classes. So the City of Greater Bendigo started with our R-spec, our road assets, and our stormwater drainage assets, because we saw them as something around 80% of our asset value for the organisation. They were our most important assets to receive, to ensure that they were there ready for, road inspections according to the road management plan. So we started small, we focused on those asset classes to begin with, and we have plans to roll it out to other asset classes, of course, the open space asset class and buildings, but start small, nail the process, and then you can always build on that. Also, other advice for organizations would be to communicate early and communicate effectively, of course. So get an internal understanding and commitment. So within your internal organization, ensure that you've got managers on board, maybe even directors perhaps, so that they understand what this solution is going to provide, and get commitment from within the organization before starting the implementation. Then ensure that you communicate effectively with your developer community. So give them a heads up. We gave them, in our instance, we gave them something like 3 or 4 months, letting them know that we would be changing process over to delivery of as constructed via the ACDC portal. And finally, final piece of advice is to ensure you have some sort of stick or something that you can whack developers with to hold them accountable for delivering everything via the ACDC portal in a timely manner. So in our situation, we had excellent relationships with our developer community and our internal project managers, and that has served us very well. But I still would recommend having some sort of stick. So an example of that might be a bond for external developers to ensure that they provide the as constructed data, or have it as part of your planning permit process before permits get approved or statement of compliance gets issued. And also, as part of that, is to get the full benefits out of the ACDC solution, you need to be able to rely on those developers delivering the information.
Okay, so to summarize the things that Zane mentioned, funding, support, communication, the internal commitment. One of the challenges, by the way, of this transformation is there are multiple parties involved. And so this communication and prepping folks on either side of the various parts of the workflow, that's a challenge, because you're dealing with developers, you're dealing with engineering, you're dealing with maybe even planning, you're dealing with the asset folks, and an approval process as well. So those are all things to consider. Zane mentioned support, communication, the internal commitment and communication with the developer community. So that's communication and commitment on both parts. It was very interesting to have some sort of a stick. I'm glad he clarified. What he's really meaning, I guess, is some form of incentive that the organization can actually apply to get people to use the approved system that you've got. And one of the ways there that I've heard as well is sometimes some organizations don't really have the willpower. I guess there are other words for it, but the willpower to enforce you will submit to this given standard with this given format. And one of the ways around that is to produce a gray area. You can have it where you set it up and say, look, if the developer submits in this form, then there's going to be the turnaround time is going to be quicker, but also there's not going to be any kind of charge. Whereas you can, in fact, enforce a charge for the effort it's going to take to manually recapture all of that stuff that they submit. So if they choose not to use the digital transformed workflow and they give you the manual one, then they're going to have to pay the price. Because actually, at the end of the day, the organization, you as the asset owner, if you're one of those, you're actually paying the bill for doing that manual data capture and the QA, QC and checking of all of that. So that's really a look then at the benefits, some of the issues, and we've looked at a couple of little case studies here. So At this point, happy to take questions. And if you wanted more info, I mean, you're welcome to contact us directly, Open Spatial. Asconstructed.com as a website as well. Has a bunch of stuff on it. It is, in fact, a full-blown website. It is also the entry point to the portal itself. So if you come in here, if you go to asconstructed.com, you'll see that it's got a bunch of information here. You can get, you can see videos of various things. You can schedule a meeting. You can look for training. So project validation essentially is focused for the developers. So that's somebody who's going to go in on a project by project basis, as opposed to enterprise validation is going to be focused. And so there's, the workflows, similar things to what you've seen here. And this is the project validation part of it. And actually developers on a project by project can sign up directly online. If the asset owners are doing that project, then it's better to go through the asset owner. And so on the enterprise page here, we run through a bunch of information just on what it looks like from the enterprise or the asset owner. And that kind of ties in. You'll see that the online is project basis, whereas the desktop and enterprise or asset owner is the combination of those, where they're using both to push directly into GIS. And then the portal itself, of course, if you click in here, this is the entryway into the portal. There's other stuff here. There's, downloading software or whatever, but also onto the portal you can get on here. And this takes you then to the asconstructed.com login. And if you log in here, you get to your dashboard, and that can be a dashboard that's a dual between the developer and or the asset owner. So if you're the asset owner admin, you can define projects, you can define organizations, workflows, etc. If you're logging in as you're a developer, you have projects available, you can go and look at documents associated with those, and you can interact with it. I would love to show you all of this. I tried to focus mostly on the digital transformation part of this workflow. Happy to do a full-blown product demo to anybody. As I mentioned during the presentation, we designed ACDC as a solution to take account of both sides of that equation, of whether you're on the developer side or the asset owner side. And even if you're the asset owner, you may have engineers in-house. So here's a given person's submittals. You can see what they've got there. They've either failed or passed, and off you go. Thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.